The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal gardens of Kepler 442b as Vethal walked through the peaceful streets of his city. His skin glowed a soft blue, showing his calm mood to anyone who might see him. The Zelani had always worn their emotions on their skin, and today Vethal felt at peace. His daughter Lyrisen ran ahead of him, her young skin shimmering between yellow and green as she laughed and played with the other children. The Zelani had lived this way for thousands of years. They built beautiful cities that grew from the ground like living things. They made music that could heal the sick and art that showed the very soul of their world. War was something they had read about in old books from other planets, but it was as foreign to them as breathing water would be to a human. Vethal served on the High Council, helping to guide his people in matters of trade and science. Today was supposed to be like any other day. He would attend the morning session, discuss new farming techniques with the agricultural ministers, and then return home to have lunch with his family. The biggest worry on his mind was whether the new solar collectors would produce enough energy for the coming winter months. That peace shattered when the sky began to burn. The first ships appeared as small dots against the blue sky, but they grew larger by the second. Vethal had seen ships before. Trading vessels from nearby systems visited regularly, bringing news and goods from across the galaxy. But these ships were different. They were huge, dark things that seemed to eat the light around them. Worst of all, they were falling toward the planet like meteors, but they were not burning up in the atmosphere like meteors should. Lyrisen stopped playing and looked up at the sky. Her skin turned pale white with fear. Around the city, other Zelani were doing the same thing, their skin colors shifting as panic spread like a wave through the population. The first explosions came without warning. Bright flashes lit up the horizon as the strange ships fired energy beams at the outer settlements. Vethal grabbed his daughter and ran toward the council building, but he could see that running would not save them. More ships kept coming through the clouds, and each one brought death with it. At the same time, far across the galaxy, Captain Lisa Martinez was having a very different kind of morning. She sat in the command chair of the Earth survey vessel Horizon, drinking coffee and reading reports about mineral surveys in the outer rim systems. Space exploration was usually boring work. Most of the time, they found empty planets with nothing but rocks and gas. Sometimes they found planets with simple life forms like bacteria or primitive plants. Finding anything truly interesting happened maybe once in a career. Lisa had been in space for 15 years, and the most exciting thing she had ever discovered was a moon with deposits of rare metals that Earth needed for ship construction. She was starting to think that all the adventure stories about space exploration were just made-up nonsense, designed to recruit young people into the survey service. Then her communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Walsh, called out from his station, "Captain, I'm getting a signal. It's very weak, but the computer says it's coming from outside our mapped territory." Lisa set down her coffee and walked over to Danny's station. The young officer was frowning at his instruments, adjusting settings and running the signal through different filters. "Can you clean it up?" Lisa asked. "I'm trying, but it's really faint. Like it's coming from very far away or the transmitter is damaged." Danny worked for several more minutes, his fingers dancing across the controls. "There, I think I got something." The speakers crackled with static, and then a voice came through. It spoke in a language that Lisa had never heard before, but the ship's computer immediately began working to translate it. The voice sounded desperate, afraid. Even before the translation appeared on the screen, Lisa could hear the fear in those alien words. The translation came through in pieces. "Please, anyone, they are killing, help us, no weapons, children dying, please respond." The signal cut off, leaving only static. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She had never heard a real distress call before, but she knew that was what this had to be. Someone out there was in serious trouble and they were begging for help. "Danny, can you get a fix on where that signal came from?" "Working on it now, Captain." The young man's face was serious as he ran calculations. "It's coming from a system about 40 light years from here. The computer shows no records of any human contact with that area." Lisa thought for a moment. 40 light years was far outside Earth's normal patrol routes. If there were people in trouble out there, Earth Command probably did not even know they existed. But that desperate voice kept echoing in her mind. "Send a full report to Admiral Peterson at Luna Command," she ordered. "Include everything we have on this signal and the location it came from. Mark it as urgent." While Lisa was making her report, the situation on Kepler 442b was getting much worse. The alien ships had landed, and now Vethal could see the creatures that had come to destroy his world. They looked like giant insects, but they walked on two legs and carried weapons that shot beams of deadly energy. Their bodies were covered in thick armor that looked like it had grown naturally, and their eyes glowed red in the shadows of their ships. The Korth had found another world to conquer. Bethel had learned about the Korth from old intelligence reports that trading ships sometimes brought. They were a species that lived only to expand their territory and destroy anything that got in their way. They had wiped out dozens of peaceful civilizations across the galaxy, and now they had come for the Zelani. The worst part was that the Zelani had no way to fight back. They had never built weapons because they had never needed them. Their police carried tools to help people, not hurt them. Their military was really just a group of people who helped during natural disasters like earthquakes or storms. Bethal managed to get Lyrisen to the council building, which had thick walls and a deep basement that might offer some protection. Other families were arriving with the same idea, and soon the basement was full of frightened Zelani whose skin flickered through colors of fear and despair. From the basement, Bethel could hear the sounds of destruction above. The Korth were methodically destroying everything in the city. They were not just conquering the Zelani, they were erasing them. As the senior council member present, Bethel knew he had to do something. The Zelani had emergency communication equipment that could send messages across the galaxy. It was designed for calling for help during natural disasters. But this was the biggest disaster his people had ever faced. He sat down at the communication console and began broadcasting on every frequency he could access. The message was simple but desperate. "This is Vethal of the Zelani people on Kepler 442b. We are under attack by an enemy called the Korth. They are killing our people and destroying our cities. We have no weapons and no way to defend ourselves. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help. Our children are dying. Please respond." He sent the message over and over again, broadcasting it to every known civilization in the galaxy. Surely someone would hear it. Surely someone would care enough to help them. But as the hours passed and the sounds of destruction grew louder above them, no one answered. The Zelani were alone, and they were dying, and no one in the galaxy seemed to care enough to help them. At least that was what Vethal thought. He had no way of knowing that 40 light-years away, a human captain named Lisa Martinez was already making sure that his desperate plea would reach the right people. And he certainly had no way of knowing what humans did to anyone who threatened innocent people. 3 days had passed since the Korth invasion began, and Vethal had not slept for a single hour. He remained hunched over the communication console in the council building basement, sending the same desperate message over and over again. His skin had turned a dull gray color that other Zelani only saw when someone was dying of old age or sickness. Above him, the sounds of destruction had changed. The loud explosions and energy weapon fire from the first day had been replaced by something much worse. Now he could hear the Korth hunting parties moving through the streets. They made clicking noises with their mouths as they searched for survivors, and sometimes Vethal heard screams that cut off too quickly. Lyrisen sat beside her father, no longer asking when they could go home. The 8-year-old had learned in 3 days what most Zelani never learned in their entire lives. Sometimes the world was not safe, and sometimes bad things happened to good people for no reason at all. "Papa," she whispered, "why won't anyone help us?" Bethel did not have an answer. He had sent messages to 17 different species across the galaxy. Some of them were powerful civilizations with strong military forces. Others were trading partners who had done business with the Zelani for hundreds of years. A few were even species that the Zelani had helped during their own times of trouble, providing food and medicine when disasters struck their worlds. But every single message came back with the same type of response. Some governments said they were sorry but could not get involved in conflicts outside their territory. Others said they would consider sending aid after the situation was resolved. A few simply never responded at all. The worst response came from the Altarian Republic, who had been the Zelani's closest trading partners. Their message was cold and direct. The Altarian Republic cannot risk war with the Korth Empire over the Zelani situation. We suggest you negotiate a surrender to minimize casualties. Negotiate a surrender, as if the Korth were interested in taking prisoners. Vethal was about to send his message for the 1000th time, when something different happened. A new signal appeared on his console, coming from a part of space that his equipment showed as unexplored territory. The signal was strong and clear, not like the weak responses he had been getting from other civilizations. A voice spoke in a language his computer had never heard before, but the translation system worked quickly. The voice belonged to a female and she sounded calm but concerned. "This is Colonel Amy Thompson of the Earth Exploration Command, calling Vethal of the Zelani people. We received your distress signal and are en route to your position. Please respond if you are able to receive this transmission." Vethal stared at the console for several seconds, not believing what he had heard. Earth. He had never heard of any species called humans or any place called Earth. But someone was actually responding to his call for help. Someone was coming. He keyed the transmitter with shaking hands. "This is Vethal. Thank you for responding. We thought no one was going to help us. Can you give me a status report on your situation?" Colonel Thompson's voice came through clearly. For the next hour, Vethal told the human everything. He described how the Korth had arrived without warning and begun destroying cities. He explained that the Zelani had no military and no weapons that could hurt the invaders. He told her about the hunting parties that were tracking down survivors and the terrible things the Korth did to anyone they caught. Colonel Thompson asked many questions, and her questions showed that she understood military tactics in a way that no Zelani ever could. She wanted to know about Korth weapons, their ship positions, how many troops they had landed, and what their patterns of movement were. "I need you to be very careful about staying hidden," she told Vethal. "My ship is small and fast, but we are still 2 days away from your system. Can your people hold out that long?" "We will try," Vethal said. "But Colonel, you should know that other species have refused to help us because they say the Korth are too dangerous. I do not want your people to die trying to save us." There was a pause before Thompson responded. "Let me worry about the Korth. You just focus on keeping your people alive until we get there." Colonel Amy Thompson sat in the command chair of the stealth frigate Nighthawk as it raced through hyperspace toward the Zelani system. She was a career military officer who had spent 20 years fighting pirates and raiders on the frontier. She had seen what happened when strong predators found weak prey, and she did not like it one bit. Her ship was designed for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, not for fighting a full invasion force. The Nighthawk had advanced sensors and stealth systems that could make it nearly invisible, but it only carried enough weapons to deal with small targets like raiders or smugglers. Going up against an entire Korth fleet would be suicide, but Thompson was not planning to fight the Korth fleet directly. Her job was to gather intelligence and find out exactly what Earth would be dealing with if they decided to intervene. Admiral Peterson had made it clear that Earth Command needed detailed information before they could make any decisions about military action. The problem was that Thompson already knew what her report was going to say. She had fought against slave raiders before, and the Korth sounded like the same type of enemy, just bigger and more organized. The Zelani were going to be wiped out unless someone with serious military power stepped in to stop it. As the Nighthawk traveled through hyperspace, Thompson reviewed everything Earth knew about the Korth Empire. It was not much. They were an insectoid species that had been expanding across their region of space for several hundred years. They conquered other species and either enslaved them or killed them, depending on what was more useful. No one had ever successfully negotiated with them or convinced them to leave a world once they decided to invade it. Most troubling of all, intelligence reports suggested that the Korth were not just random raiders. They had a long-term plan for expansion, and they were very good at picking targets that other species would not defend. They had wiped out dozens of peaceful civilizations, and the rest of the galaxy had simply watched it happen. Dr. Helen Park, the Nighthawk's science officer, was studying what little data they had on Korth technology. She was a xenobiologist who specialized in understanding alien species and their capabilities. "Colonel," she said from her workstation, "I've been analyzing the reports we have on previous Korth invasions. There's a pattern here that's very disturbing." "What kind of pattern?" "They don't just conquer worlds for resources or territory. Every planet they've taken has had very specific environmental conditions. Rich soil, moderate climate, abundant water, and in every case they've completely eliminated the native population and then done something to the planet's ecosystem. Thompson frowned. What do you mean, done something? I'm not sure yet, but the few long-range surveys we have show that Korth-controlled worlds undergo major biological changes after conquest. New plant species appear, the atmospheric composition shifts slightly, and sensor readings suggest massive underground construction projects. You think they're terraforming? It's possible, but if so, they're terraforming for something specific, and whatever that something is, it requires the complete elimination of any existing intelligent life. Thompson felt a chill as she understood what Dr. Park was suggesting. The Korth were not just invaders or conquerors. They were something much worse. They were exterminators who were preparing conquered worlds for some purpose that required the native populations to be completely gone. That meant the Zelani were not just fighting for their freedom or their homes. They were fighting for their very existence as a species. 2 hours later, the Nighthawk dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zelani system. Thompson immediately activated the ship's stealth systems and began scanning for Korth ships. What she saw made her stomach turn. The system was full of massive Korth vessels, far more than intelligence reports had suggested they used for a typical invasion. Worse, several of the ships were not warships at all. They were huge construction vessels, the kind used for major planetary engineering projects. Dr. Park had been right. The Korth were not just invading Kepler 442b. They were preparing to transform it into something else entirely. Get me a secure channel to Admiral Peterson, Thompson ordered. Priority 1 encryption. He needs to see this immediately. As the Nighthawk moved carefully through the outer system, staying hidden in the shadows of dead moons and asteroid fields, Thompson began documenting everything she could see. The number of ships, their positions, their capabilities, and most importantly, what they were doing to the planet below. The Zelani had asked for help, and most of the galaxy had turned away. But Thompson was going to make sure that Admiral Peterson and Earth Command knew exactly what was happening here. Because if humanity decided to intervene, they needed to understand that this was not just about saving one peaceful species from conquest. This was about stopping something that could threaten every peaceful world in the galaxy. The Korth had made their biggest mistake when they assumed no one would care enough about the Zelani to fight for them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Jake Peterson stood in the war room at Luna Command, staring at the holographic display that showed Colonel Thompson's reconnaissance data. The images were worse than anything he had seen in 30 years of military service. Burning cities, fleeing civilians, and worst of all, the massive Korth construction ships that were already beginning to strip mine entire continents. How many ships are we looking at? He asked. 47 combat vessels, 12 construction ships, and at least 20 support craft. Colonel Thompson's voice came through the secure communication link. Admiral, this is not a normal invasion. They are setting up permanent operations here. Dr. Park's voice joined the conversation. Sir, I have been analyzing the Korth excavation patterns. They are digging egg chambers. Millions of them. This planet is being prepared as a breeding world for their species. Peterson felt his jaw tighten. He had seen the reports about other worlds the Korth had conquered, but no one had understood what they were really doing until now. They were not just expanding their territory. They were preparing to increase their population by billions of individuals, creating enough Korth to overwhelm any resistance they might face in the future. What about the Zelani? Peterson asked. Still fighting, but barely. Thompson replied. They have maybe a few thousand survivors hiding in caves and underground tunnels. The Korth are hunting them with some kind of tracking creatures. Every day there are fewer of them. Peterson looked around the war room at his senior staff. General Rick Cole, the head of Earth's Marine Corps, was studying the tactical displays with a grim expression. Admiral Sarah Williams, who commanded Earth's main battle fleet, was calculating ship movements and supply requirements. President Karen Mitchell had arrived an hour ago and was sitting quietly in the corner, listening to everything but not yet speaking. The problem was not whether Earth could help the Zelani. Peterson was confident that Earth's military could defeat the Korth force in the system, even though it would be a hard fight. The problem was that Earth was already stretched thin, defending its own territory against the hegemony coalition. an aggressive alliance of species that had been making threatening moves along Earth's borders for months. "Admiral," President Mitchell finally spoke, "what are the risks if we intervene?" "Militarily, we can handle the Korth ships in that system," Peterson replied. "But it would require a major deployment. The Valkyrie, both carrier groups, and at least 2 Marine divisions. That would leave our home defense fleet seriously undermanned if the hegemony decides to attack while we are gone." "And if we do not intervene?" General Cole answered that question. "Then we watch an entire species get wiped out, and the Korth add billions of new soldiers to their forces. Eventually, they will be strong enough to threaten everyone, including us." President Mitchell was quiet for several minutes, studying the tactical displays and reading the intelligence reports. Peterson knew she was facing the hardest decision any leader could make. Risk the safety of her own people to save strangers, or play it safe and hope the problem would not get worse. The decision was made for her when Lieutenant Danny Walsh's voice came through the communication system. He was still aboard Captain Martinez's survey ship, monitoring alien communications across the galaxy. "Admiral Peterson, you need to hear this," Danny said. "We just intercepted a Korth transmission. They are calling for reinforcements. A lot of reinforcements." The holographic display changed to show a new star map. Red symbols appeared in dozens of systems, showing Korth fleet movements toward the Zelani homeworld. "Sir," Danny continued, "intelligence estimates suggest they are bringing at least 200 more ships to that system. And some of them are not invasion ships. They are colony ships carrying millions of Korth civilians." Peterson felt his blood run cold. The Korth were not just planning to use Kepler 442b as a breeding world. They were turning it into their new capital, a base from which they could launch attacks across the entire galaxy. President Mitchell stood up slowly. "Admiral, how long before those reinforcements arrive?" "Based on their current speed, maybe 2 weeks." "And how long would it take us to get our forces to the Zelani system?" "If we leave immediately, 1 week." The president nodded. "Then we have 1 week to end this before it becomes impossible to stop." She turned to face the entire war room. "I am authorizing Operation Shepherd. Full humanitarian intervention with authorization to use any force necessary to protect civilian populations." Peterson felt a surge of pride in his president and his species. Earth could have taken the safe path and ignored the Zelani's plight, just like every other civilization in the galaxy had done. Instead, they were choosing to risk everything to protect people they had never even met before. "General Cole," the president continued, "how quickly can you get your Marines ready for deployment?" "Give me 12 hours, Madam President. But I want to send an advance force immediately. We have assets already in the area." Meanwhile, in a classified military facility on Earth's moon, Lieutenant Colonel Ben Harris was briefing his special operations team on a mission that officially did not exist. Harris was a veteran of more conflicts than he liked to remember, but he had never faced anything quite like this. "Gentlemen, we are going to help some very nice people who are in very serious trouble," he told his 12-man team. "The enemy has superior numbers, superior weapons, and they have been planning this invasion for months. We have surprise training and the fact that they have never fought humans before." Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, what are the rules of engagement?" "Simple," Harris replied. "The Korth are exterminating an entire species. Anyone carrying a weapon and working for them is a legitimate target. Anyone threatening civilians gets stopped permanently. Any questions?" There were no questions. Harris's team specialized in asymmetric warfare, fighting enemies who were bigger and better equipped by using speed, surprise, and superior tactics. They had trained for situations exactly like this one. "Transport leaves in 2 hours," Harris said. "We will arrive in the Zelani system before the main fleet. Our job is to link up with the survivors and start making life difficult for the Korth ground forces." While the Marines prepared for their secret mission, Captain Lisa Martinez was still monitoring communications from her survey ship. She had been listening to Vethal's desperate messages for days, and she had heard the hope in his voice when Colonel Thompson made contact. Now she was monitoring Korth communications, trying to gather any intelligence that might help Earth's forces. What she heard made her call Admiral Peterson immediately. "Sir, the Korth are broadcasting something on their internal channels. The computer has been working on translating it, and I think you need to hear this." The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. The Korth were celebrating their victory over the Zelani and discussing their plans for the planet. But more importantly, they were talking about their next targets. A dozen other peaceful worlds were marked for invasion once the Zelani system was fully secured. "Admiral," Martinez said, "they are not planning to stop with the Zelani. This is just the beginning." Peterson realized that President Mitchell had made the right decision for reasons she did not even know about yet. If Earth did not stop the Korth here, they would be facing an enemy with hundreds of billions of soldiers and the resources of dozens of conquered worlds. The time for debate was over. Earth was going to war. But first, Lieutenant Colonel Harris and his team were going to teach the Korth something they had never learned before. Sometimes the prey fights back, and sometimes the prey has bigger teeth than the predator expects. As Harris's unmarked transport ship slipped quietly through hyperspace toward the Zelani system, the lieutenant colonel reviewed everything he knew about guerrilla warfare. The Korth thought they were hunting helpless civilians who had no idea how to fight back. They were about to discover what happened when Earth's Deathworlders decided that someone needed to be stopped, and Ben Harris was very good at stopping people who hurt innocent civilians. Back on Kepler 442b, Vethal continued broadcasting his desperate messages, not knowing that help was already on the way. His skin had turned almost completely gray, and Lyrison was worried that her father was dying from exhaustion and stress. "Papa, maybe we should rest for a while," she said softly. Vethal shook his head. "Not yet, little one. Colonel Thompson said help was coming, but I need to keep transmitting so they can find us when they arrive." He had no way of knowing that in less than 3 days, 12 of Earth's most dangerous soldiers would be landing on his world, ready to teach the Korth what humans did to anyone who threatened children. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth's species was called Deathworlders. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Harris crouched in the forest outside what used to be the Zelani city of Tamara, watching Korth hunting parties move through the ruins below. His team had been on the planet for 18 hours, and they had already learned things about their enemy that no intelligence report could have told them. The Korth were excellent at destroying things, but they were terrible at actually fighting an enemy that fought back. They had spent so many years conquering peaceful species that they had forgotten how to deal with real soldiers. Harris spoke quietly into his radio. "Rodriguez, what do you see from your position?" Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez was hidden in the wreckage of a collapsed building, about 200 meters away. 6 hunting beasts, maybe 8 Korth handlers. They are following scent trails, but they keep bunching up together. No tactical spacing at all. Phillips, you ready with the surprise? Corporal Mike Phillips was crouched next to a pile of debris that looked natural, but was actually covering 50 pounds of military explosives. "Ready when you are, sir." Harris had spent the previous night meeting with Vethal and the surviving Zelani leaders. The peaceful aliens had been amazed to learn that someone had actually come to help them, but they were also terrified that the humans would get themselves killed, trying to fight the Korth. Harris had explained to them that humans were very good at fighting, especially when they were fighting to protect innocent people. What he had not told them was that his team had been specifically chosen because they were the kind of soldiers who got angry when they saw bullies hurting defenseless victims. "All units, execute," Harris said calmly. Phillips triggered his explosives just as the Korth hunting party reached the center of the debris field. The blast killed 4 Korth instantly and sent their hunting beasts running in panic. Before the survivors could figure out what had happened, Rodriguez opened fire from his hidden position with a military rifle that could punch through Korth armor like it was made of paper. Harris and his team had learned something very important about the Korth in their first day on the planet. For all their advanced technology and scary appearance, they died just as easily as anything else when you shot them with the right weapons. The surviving Korth tried to take cover and return fire, but they had no idea where the shots were coming from. Rodriguez had already moved to a different position, and the other members of Harris's team were surrounding the hunting party from multiple directions. It was over in less than 2 minutes. 10 Korth soldiers and 6 hunting beasts lay dead, and not a single human had been injured. "That makes 37 Korth down since yesterday," Rodriguez reported as the team regrouped. "Think they are starting to notice us yet?" Harris smiled grimly. "Oh, they have noticed. Question is whether they are smart enough to figure out what they are really dealing with." Meanwhile, far above the planet, the Korth fleet was indeed noticing that something had changed. Hive Commander Zektar stared at the reports coming in from his ground forces with growing frustration. In the past 3 days, he had lost more soldiers than in the previous 3 months of the invasion. The losses were not the problem. The Korth Empire had billions of soldiers, and losing a few dozen meant nothing. The problem was that his forces had no idea what was killing them. The attacks came from nowhere, struck fast and hard, and then disappeared before his troops could respond. At first, Zektar had assumed the Zelani had finally learned to fight back. But the weapons being used were far more advanced than anything the peaceful aliens had ever developed. Someone else was on the planet, someone with military training and access to serious firepower. "Commander," his intelligence officer reported, "we have intercepted communications suggesting that an unknown species has made contact with the Zelani survivors." "What species?" Zektar demanded. "The signals are heavily encrypted, but our computers have identified some words. They call themselves humans, and they appear to come from a planet called Earth." Zektar had never heard of humans or Earth, but that did not concern him. The galaxy was full of minor species that sometimes tried to interfere with Korth operations. Usually, destroying a few of their ships was enough to convince them to mind their own business. "How many ships?" he asked. "Unknown, Commander, but based on the size of the force operating on the surface, probably no more than 1 or 2 scout vessels." Zektar relaxed. A species bold enough to land troops on a Korth-controlled world was either very brave or very stupid. Either way, they would learn their mistake soon enough. What Zektar did not know was that Admiral Peterson's main battle fleet was less than 6 hours away from the system, traveling at maximum speed toward what was about to become the largest space battle in human history. Admiral Peterson stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Valkyrie, watching the tactical displays as his fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace. Captain Steve Johnson commanded the carrier Intrepid, which carried enough fighters to take on a small fleet by itself. Captain Maria Gonzalez led the marine transport ships that would land troops to support Harris's team on the surface. "All ships report ready for combat operations," reported Commander Nancy Clark from her position at the tactical station. "Dr. Park, what is the latest intelligence on Korth fleet positions?" Peterson asked. Dr. Helen Park had transferred to the Valkyrie to serve as the fleet's expert on Korth technology and tactics. 47 combat ships in defensive positions around the planet. They appear to be spread out to prevent exactly the kind of attack we are planning. That was their first mistake, Peterson said. They are trying to defend everything, which means they cannot defend anything well. "Captain Johnson, are your pilots ready?" Johnson's voice came through the communication system from the Intrepid. "Chomping at the bit, Admiral. Major Lucy Chen has been briefing her squadron on Korth ship weaknesses all week. They know exactly what to do." Peterson nodded. The plan was simple but dangerous. The human fleet would drop out of hyperspace in the middle of the Korth formation, using surprise and superior firepower to destroy as many enemy ships as possible before they could organize a defense. Meanwhile, Johnson's fighters would target the Korth construction ships that were strip mining the planet. The goal was not just to win the battle. The goal was to win it so decisively that any other Korth forces in the area would think twice before attacking peaceful species again. "All ships, prepare to drop out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, Peterson announced. In the fighter bays of the Intrepid, Major Lucy Chen was making final checks on her fighters' weapon systems. She had been flying combat missions for 8 years, but she had never been in a battle this important. The survival of an entire species depended on what happened in the next few hours. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader," she announced to her pilots. "Remember, those construction ships are the priority targets. Every minute they keep operating, more Zelani die. Let's make sure this is the last day the Korth ever threaten innocent people." The human fleet materialized in the middle of the Korth formation like a thunderbolt from clear skies. The Valkyrie's main guns opened fire immediately, targeting the largest Korth warship with kinetic rounds that could punch through a mountain. The enemy ship's bioarmor, which had seemed so impressive against the weapons of peaceful species, crumpled like paper against human military technology. Captain Johnson launched his fighters while the Korth were still trying to understand what was happening. Major Chen led her squadron straight toward the construction ships, dodging defensive fire from Korth fighters that had been designed to hunt down fleeing civilians, not engage trained military pilots. The Korth had made their second mistake when they assumed that all spacefaring species fought the same way they did. They expected their enemies to be cautious, to try to minimize losses, to retreat when faced with superior numbers. They had never fought humans before. Human pilots flew through debris fields and energy storms that would have killed any sane pilot, pressing attacks that any reasonable tactical computer would have labeled as suicide missions. Human ships rammed enemy vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition, and human captains kept fighting even when their ships were falling apart around them. On the surface of the planet, Harris and his team heard the sounds of the space battle overhead and knew it was time for the final phase of their mission. "All right, people," Harris announced to his team and the Zelani survivors who had learned to fight alongside them. "Our fleet is here and they are keeping the Korth busy upstairs. Now we end this down here." The past week had changed the Zelani in ways their peaceful culture had never imagined possible. Vethal carried a human weapon and knew how to use it. Young Zelani who had never heard anything in their lives had learned to set traps and plan ambushes. They were still not warriors in the way that humans understood the term, but they were no longer helpless victims. The combined human-Zelani force moved toward the main Korth command post, where Hive Commander Zektar was trying desperately to coordinate his force's response to the human attack. He was about to learn what happened when Earth's Deathworlders decided that someone needed to be stopped permanently. Above them, the space battle raged on, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Korth had superior numbers. The space battle above Kepler 442b was not going the way Hive Commander Zektar had planned. From his command ship's bridge, he watched human fighters tear through his fleet with a combination of skill and reckless courage that his tactical computers could not understand or predict. Major Lucy, Chen dove her fighter through a cloud of plasma fire that should have killed her instantly, but somehow she emerged on the other side with her weapons still firing. Her target was one of the massive construction ships that had been strip mining the Zelani homeworld, and she was not going to let distance or defensive fire stop her from reaching it. "Blue 2, stay with me," she called to her wingman as they approached the construction ship. "We need to hit the biocore simultaneously." The construction ship was 10 times larger than Chen's fighter, protected by armor that could withstand meteor impacts and defended by dozens of weapon turrets. Any sane pilot would have looked for an easier target. Chen was not interested in being sane. She was interested in making sure the Korth never hurt another innocent person. Her missiles struck the construction ship's biocore at the exact same moment her wingman's did. The massive vessel shuddered, its biological systems failing as explosions tore through its vital organs. Slowly, like a dying whale, it began to fall toward the planet below. "That's 3 construction ships down," Chen reported to Admiral Peterson. "The rest are trying to run." "Let them run," Peterson replied from the Valkyrie's bridge. "They can tell their friends what happens when you threaten peaceful people." The space battle was essentially over. Half of the Korth warships had been destroyed, and the rest were fleeing toward the edge of the system. But Peterson knew the real victory was happening on the surface, where Lieutenant Colonel Harris was about to end the Korth ground invasion permanently. Harris crouched behind the remains of a Zelani building, watching the Korth command center that Hive Commander Zektar had established in what used to be the city's main plaza. The building was heavily defended, surrounded by automated weapon systems and patrolled by the last organized group of Korth soldiers on the planet. Beside him, Vethal checked his weapon one more time. The Zelani leader had learned to fight over the past week, but more importantly, he had learned that sometimes good people had to do violent things to protect those they loved. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Harris asked. "My team can handle the assault. You do not have to be part of it." Bethal's skin showed a steady blue glow, the color of determination and calm resolve. "These creatures killed my people and tried to murder my daughter. I will be part of ending this," Harris nodded. He had seen the same look in the eyes of soldiers throughout human history, when ordinary people decided they had seen enough evil and were ready to do something about it. "All units, final assault begins in 60 seconds, Harris announced to his combined human-Zelani force. The attack came from 6 different directions at once. Harris's Marines used shaped charges to blow holes in the command center's walls, while Zelani fighters who had learned guerrilla tactics over the past week cut off escape routes. The Korth defenders were brave and determined, but they were facing enemies who had spent a week learning exactly how to kill them efficiently. Sergeant Rodriguez moved through the building like a force of nature, his rifle taking down Korth soldiers with precision shots, while his tactical experience kept him ahead of every counterattack they tried to mount. The Korth had superior numbers inside the building, But Rodriguez had something they did not have. He had spent his entire life preparing for fights exactly like this one. Vethal and 2 other Zelani fighters reached the command center's communication room, where Korth technicians were trying to send distress signals to their reinforcement fleets. The Zelani, who had never heard anything in their lives 6 months ago, methodically destroyed every piece of equipment in the room, making sure the Korth could not call for help. Harris found Hive Commander Zektar in the main command room, surrounded by the last few Korth soldiers still alive in the building. The alien commander was twice Harris's size, covered in natural armor that could stop small arms fire, and armed with energy weapons that could cut through steel. None of that mattered to a human Marine who had spent 20 years learning how to kill things that were bigger and stronger than he was. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Zektar was dangerous, but Harris was faster, smarter, and had better weapons. When it was over, the Korth invasion of Kepler 442b was finished. Command center secured, Harris reported to Admiral Peterson. All Korth ground forces eliminated or surrendering. 3 hours later, Vethal stood in the ruins of his city's main plaza, watching human Marines help Zelani survivors emerge from their hiding places. Children who had not seen sunlight in weeks ran to their parents while medical teams from the human fleet worked to treat the injured. His daughter Lyricen ran to him, her skin glowing bright yellow with joy and relief. She had spent the entire battle hidden in the deepest part of the underground shelter, protected by human soldiers who had promised her father they would keep her safe. "Papa, is it really over?" she asked. "Yes, little one. The bad creatures are gone, and they will never come back." Admiral Peterson walked over to where Vethal was standing, still wearing his combat gear but with his helmet removed. The human admiral looked tired but satisfied. "Vethal, I have received word from Earth Command. President Mitchell has authorized the establishment of a permanent defense station in your system. We will make sure nothing like this ever happens to your people again." Vethal felt tears running down his face as his skin shifted to a warm gold color that meant gratitude and deep friendship. "Admiral, we can never repay what you have done for us." "You do not need to repay anything," Peterson replied. "Protecting innocent people is what we do. It is who we are." Dr. Helen Park approached them, carrying a datapad with preliminary reports on the Korth technology they had captured. "Admiral, you need to see this." The Korth were not just planning to use this world as a breeding ground. They had detailed invasion plans for 47 other systems, all of them inhabited by peaceful species. Peterson studied the data for several minutes, his expression growing darker as he read. "Dr. Park, transmit copies of these plans to every government in the galaxy. Make sure everyone knows what the Korth were really planning." Over the following weeks, word of the Battle of Kepler 442b spread throughout the galaxy. The same 17 species that had ignored the Zelani's desperate pleas for help now sent urgent diplomatic messages to Earth, requesting defense agreements and offering trade partnerships. The Altarian Republic, which had advised the Zelani to negotiate their surrender, sent a formal apology, along with an offer to provide free medical supplies for the reconstruction effort. Other species offered technology, resources, and even military support for future humanitarian missions. But the most important response came from the small, peaceful civilizations that had lived in fear of the Korth Empire for generations. They sent simple messages thanking Earth for proving that someone in the galaxy cared about protecting the innocent. 6 months later, Captain Steve Johnson stood on the bridge of the newly constructed Johnson Memorial Defense Station, orbiting Kepler 442b. The station was named after the fighter pilot who had sacrificed his life to destroy the Korth Queenship during the space battle, ensuring that no new Korth would be born on the Zelani homeworld. The station served multiple purposes. It was a military base that could defend the system against any future threats. It was a research facility where human and Zelani scientists worked together to develop new technologies. And it was a symbol that Earth would keep its promise to protect those who could not protect themselves. Lieutenant Colonel Harris, now promoted to colonel, commanded the station's Marine garrison. Many of his soldiers were Zelani who had learned to fight during the invasion and decided to dedicate their lives to protecting other peaceful species from suffering the same fate. Vethal served as the civilian administrator, coordinating between human military personnel and Zelani cultural leaders. His daughter Lyricen attended school on the station, learning alongside human children and growing up in a world where different species worked together instead of fighting each other. One day, while Harris and Vethal were reviewing security reports, an urgent message came through the station's communication system. It was another distress signal, coming from a system 40 light-years away. An unknown species was calling for help, reporting that their world was under attack by raiders who were killing civilians and destroying cities. Harris looked at Vethal, who nodded without hesitation. "This is Johnson Memorial Defense Station responding to your distress call," Harris transmitted. "We are dispatching ships to your location immediately. Help is on the way." As the human fleet prepared to depart for another rescue mission, people throughout the galaxy began to understand that something had changed forever. For the first time in galactic history, there was a species that would fight to protect strangers, simply because it was the right thing to do. The Korth Empire never recovered from their defeat at Kepler 442b. Other species that had been considering aggressive expansion decided that maybe it was better to try diplomacy first.